Nowadays, when people talk about FromSoftware, chances are 9 out of 10 will immediately think of masterpieces like the Bloodborne series, Sekiro, or even Elden Ring. The man behind all of these games, Hidetaka Miyazaki, without exaggeration, has become a giant of the gaming industry, a defining figure of game development in the 21st century. But what many people might not know, or may have simply forgotten, is the name of the game that started it all. The firstborn that carried the weight of everything that came after, Demon's Souls. So how did the game that gave birth to the entire Souls-like genre come into existence? Let's find out in today's video. In the game industry, inheritance and competition always go hand in hand. When you create a successful game, other developers will quickly follow, making their own versions inspired by what your game has already achieved. Some of these are nothing more than cheap, fast cash grab copies. But sometimes they become high-quality alternatives with unique twists of their own, turning those later games into real competitors. This cycle repeats endlessly, gradually raising the overall standard of the gaming industry, and in the end, the biggest winners are always the players. There's no such thing as stealing ideas. That's probably exactly what Sony representatives would say if asked about their initiative to create an RPG inspired by the Elder Scrolls, but strong enough to compete with Bethesda's title. Considering the massive success and groundbreaking impact of the Elder Scrolls series, it's not surprising that Sony, with PlayStation as its main console line, wanted a rival product that could both make money and assert its position. Going back to the early 2000s, the console war was heating up. Microsoft's Xbox 360 launched in 2005, Sony's PlayStation 3 followed in 2006, and Nintendo's Wii also hit the market that same year. While the Wii dominated motion-based and family-friendly games, Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 focused on powerful hardware and high-end graphics. Exclusive games became the key strategy. Both companies rushed to prepare titles made specifically for their consoles, hoping to boost hardware sales right from launch. But in 2002, The Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind achieved massive success, and it was only available on PC and Xbox. Then came the news that The Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion would be exclusive to Xbox 360 for an entire year. That alone was enough to put Sony on edge. With the PS3 approaching release, Sony desperately needed a similar RPG, and it had to be exclusive. The responsibility of finding a developer for this ambitious project was handed to producer Takeshi Kaji. Kaji openly admitted that he didn't like traditional Japanese RPGs. Instead, he preferred action-based gameplay, dark fantasy settings, and classic games like Wizardry, and most importantly, King's Field. If you didn't know, King's Field was a once-famous RPG series developed by FromSoftware, and visually it already shared some similarities with what would later become Souls games. For these reasons, FromSoftware was chosen to collaborate with Japan Studio to develop this PS3 exclusive RPG. According to Kaji's vision, the game would revive a forgotten branch of action RPGs. But having a slogan is easy. Executing it is the hard part. Development began in 2004, yet nearly 3 years passed with constant problems. The biggest issue was the lack of clear direction and a confused design philosophy. The team tried to recreate the spirit of the Elder Scrolls, a massive, open world, overwhelming freedom, first-person RPG gameplay, and a blend of old and new mechanics, all designed to fully immerse players in a medieval fantasy world. But all these efforts only resulted in a messy, unfocused product. The situation became so bad that even within FromSoftware, many believed the project was a lost cause, a failure nobody wanted to touch, and that's where opportunity appeared. While the RPG project struggled, Miyazaki worked on several Armored Core titles and even became director of Armored Core 4. Once he learned how bad the RPG project's situation was, he immediately volunteered to take full responsibility for it. The reason was simple. He wanted to make a fantasy game. While everyone else avoided a project that seemed destined to fail, where failure wouldn't even matter anymore, Miyazaki saw freedom. If the project was already being ignored, he could redesign it entirely according to his own vision. No fear of failure because everyone already expected it to fail. It was a risky move, but Hidetaka Miyazaki was officially appointed director, the captain of a sinking ship, shot while still working on Armored Core at the same time. With full control, Miyazaki began cleaning up the mess. The first step was abandoning the original direction completely. He threw out everything that tried to imitate the Elder Scrolls 4. Miyazaki openly admitted that he simply wasn't capable of creating an open-world sandbox RPG as well as Bethesda. So the world was rebuilt from scratch, no longer fully connected, but divided into smaller, separate areas, accessed through loading screens. The camera changed from first-person to third-person. Gameplay focus shifted away from freedom and immersion, toward combat and exploration. These were massive foundational changes, and Miyazaki spent a long time convincing the team that this was the right approach. This game would not be a spiritual successor to King's Field. It would be a brand new IP Demon's Souls. From that moment on, Miyazaki fully immersed himself in design, pouring in ideas, interests, and obsessions he had carried since childhood. Although Sony initially wanted a bright, epic fantasy similar to Elder Scrolls, Miyazaki believed fantasy had to be dark. His inspirations came from Western fantasy novels, old game books he grew up reading, and especially one major influence from his adult years: Berserk. The influence is obvious: grotesque monsters, medieval castles, dragons, and oppressive atmospheres. Classic dark fantasy elements like gothic castles and dragons became staples of Miyazaki's style. After countless iterations and cut ideas, the world was condensed into 5 main areas and a central hub called the Nexus. Some concepts were removed even at the last minute, but the remaining worlds left a strong impression through their art direction and level design. Unlike Elder Scrolls, where the player often becomes the center of everything, Miyazaki chose the opposite approach. The protagonist is nameless, just a passerby who arrives after everything has already happened. The story isn't shoved into your face with cutscenes or explanations. Instead, it's hinted at through item descriptions, environments, and subtle details. This design came from Miyazaki's own experiences playing old games, the excitement of exploration. He wanted players to be dropped into an unfamiliar world with no guidance, learning through curiosity. By hiding most of the past events, players are encouraged not just to explore the present, but to uncover the past, what we now call lore hunting. Another core belief of Miyazaki was that true enjoyment comes from achievement. That's why the game was designed to be difficult from the start, with no difficulty options. Still, Miyazaki emphasized that making the game hard was never the goal. Difficulty exists to force players to think, adapt, and overcome challenges. The death and retry loop trains players to test strategies, adjust, and try again until they finally succeed. That moment of victory, after failing dozens of times, is what makes Souls games so addictive. One of the most controversial mechanics was losing all resources if you died twice before recovering your bloodstain. Miyazaki understood how frustrating this would feel. But without real punishment, achievement would lose its meaning. Boss fights were designed with variety in mind. Some demanded pure skill, others were giant puzzles that players had to figure out. Bosses like Adjudicator weren't just enemies, they symbolized deeper ideas tied to the world itself. Difficulty didn't come only from enemies, but from level design. Poison swamps, especially the infamous Valley of Defilement, became legendary. Miyazaki personally tested these areas, experimenting with strategies and enduring the same suffering as players. Online features allowed players to help each other indirectly, through messages, bloodstains, and summons. Miyazaki intentionally reduced direct communication, recreating the feeling of old-school communities before instant messaging and voice chat. This design created a silent but powerful bond between players. The success of this idea later inspired other developers, even Hideo Kojima. All of these ideas went against Sony's original expectations. Executives disliked the difficulty. Sales in Japan were extremely low. Even Shuhei Yoshida believed the game would fail. Sony handed overseas publishing to Atlus and Bandai Namco. Ironically, Western players embraced the game. From YouTubers to streamers, Demon's Souls slowly became a cult phenomenon. That reception allowed Miyazaki to stay true to his philosophy, a philosophy that would later dominate the industry. Demon's Souls became the foundation of the Souls series and the legendary works that followed. Even today, nearing his 60s, Miyazaki remains devoted to dark fantasy and his creative principles. And hopefully one day, Sony will finally let Bloodborne go.